Good morning, beautiful sunny day, and we're gonna study Ramayana. So we are on page number 1568 in this book. And if you recall, this conversation or this story is being told, or the life history is being told by Sage Auguste to in Ram Darbar. Ram Darbar. So he's talking about Ravana. So the invasions of Devaloka. Flying up from Kailash, the frontier of the earth, Ravan arrived with his seething host in Devaloka. The noise his legions made as they surrounded Indra's city from every side was like the sound the Kshir Sagar made when it was churned for the Amrit. Indra heard that sound in his sabha, the Sudharma, and he rose from his ruby throne, which the worlds worshipped. All the devas were gathered in the splendid court. The 12 sons of Aditi were there, the 11 Vasus, the Rudras and Sadhyas, the Lokpals, and the 49 Maruts. The Gandharvas, Kimpurush, the Kinnars were there. The celestial Nags and countless other refulgent beings, all fabled lords of the earth and the sky. Let us prepare for war, said that King Indra as bravely as he could, but his voice quavered with fear because he knew about the boons Ravan had. Indra flew quickly as he thought, as all immortals do, whose bodies are made of light. To Vaikuntha, he came before Blue Vishnu and said abjectly, Lord, it was with your blessing I killed the Asur Namuchi, Virat, Bali, Narak, and Sambhav. Bless me again, Narayan, because the Rakshas with 10 heads is at my very gate. And you know Brahma's boon protects Ravan from me and my devas. Tell me how this demon can be slain. Mahavishnu said slowly, no Dev or Asur can kill Ravan because of Brahma's boon. I say the Rakshas will subdue the worlds, for he is truly an awesome spirit. I myself will not face him in battle when I know I cannot vanquish him. Yet I will kill him when the time comes, because his death is written at my hands. As for you, Indra, the demon is at your gates, and you must fight him. Fight him, and do not be afraid. I will protect you, but do not hope to quell Ravan in battle. That you cannot do. Indra went back to his city, and soon the Dev host issued from the gates of Amravati like a glittering cloud and faced the legion of the night outside. At the head of the sinister force of demons were Prahasta and Marich, Mahaparshu, Mahodra, Akampan, Nikumb, Shuk, Saran, Samhrad, Dhumanketu, Mahadamshtra, Ghatodra, Jambuwali, Mahan, Mahar, Mahaharda, Virupaksha, Suptgan, Yagnakop, Durumukh, Dushan, Khar, Trishras, Karavrajash, Suryastanu, Mahakayu, Ankehe, Devantak, Narantak, and 1,000 others as ferocious. Their eyes glowed like torches in the twilight. Surrounded by these Rakshasas, Ravan's grandfather Sumali took the field and scattered Agni, Vayu, Surya, Som, Varun, and Rudras and Vasus, the Ashwins, Dharam, and Indra himself, and their Balaith legions of Gandharvas, Kinnars, and other warriors of Devlok. The Dev forces fled in every direction. Then the eighth Vasu, Savitra, the mightiest of them, took the field. He arrived like a legion of light himself to dispel the macabre darkness that had fallen over Amravati. At his side came two magnificent sons of Aditi called Tvashtar and Push. The air was a denseness of weapons, of wild yells and roars, and screams when some missile or other found its mark. Blood flowed in rivulets and lapped at the dark and bright warrior's feet. For a while it seemed Tvashtar and Push were containing the Rakshasas, and they killed thousands. Then Sumali returned to the field, mounted in his chariot drawn by winged serpents. He came armed with every astra and with Maya. Like a black tempest, he blew at the Dev host and routed them. Gandharv's blood and Kumpurush precious blood flowed with Rakshas's gore. Sweet musical screams mingled with coarse yells and curses. Only Savitra stood unflinching before the terrible Somali and matched him shaft for shaft, spell for spell. The Vasu shone like a rising sun upon the dark field. He shattered Somali's airy chariot with a volley of asters like a bank of lightning bolts. Before the chariot was consumed and its serpents reduced to charred ropes, Somali leaped down to the ground. As he stood panting with no escape, Savitra advanced on him. Somali had no weapon left and raised his sorcerer's hands to defend himself. Savitra seized up a great mace, whose flaming head made it seem like Yama's hand. The god blazed like a meteor as the Vasu raised its eye, then brought it down in a crackling squarely on Sumalu's head. It was like Indra's adamantine vajra falling on a pale mountain. There was a blinding flash of light. Then an echoing silence fell on the battle. Nothing remained of Somali save a soft heap of grey ashes that the wind already bore away. The Rakshas army howled like some vast horde of wolves in one dreadful voice, and they ran headlong from battle. The battle in Devloka. Roaring when he saw his great grandfather Sumali die, Ravan's son Megnath took the field. Mounted in his gleaming chariot that rode as easily through the air as it did on the ground, he swept at Indra's army like a summer fire in a dry forest. None of the Devas, Gandharvas, or Vasus could stand against the invincible Indrajit. They soon ran from him any way they could. Indra cried after them, "Cowards, come back and fight. Look, I am sending my own son to tame the Rakshas's boy. Come back, Devas, come back." Indra's son Jayant flew at Megnath like a sleek comet. Heartened, the other Devas rallied around him and came back to fight. They surrounded Ravan's prince, whose bow streamed arrows as a star does light, and felled 1,000 soldiers of the host of heaven every moment. Jayant's Sarthi was Matle's son Gomukh. Meghnad struck him with a storm of 100 gold-tipped arrows. Jayant drew blooms of blood on the Rakshas prince's chariot. Roaring like thunderheads, the two princes attacked each other with every kind of astra and shakti. Devlok was lit by their battle, as if by a score of new suns. But these weapons also brought an unnatural light in the wake of their incendiary paths. Darkness fell over the battle in Swarg, an utter darkness. Now shrill cries echoed on every side, for in that blind night Dev fell unwittingly on Dev, and Rakshas on Rakshas. Suddenly an awesome and incandescent demon materialized on the panic-stricken field. He was a great Asur who lived below the sea, Sachi's father Puloma. Quick as a thought, Puloma seized his grandson Jayant in his arms and spirited him away from the battle. He plunged into the turquoise waves, below which he lived in a fabulous city. Some light broke again on the battle, and now with the heroic Jayant gone, Meghnad broke on the hapless army of Devlok again, like a terrible calamity. He let flow streams of blood on every side, and the Dev host soon fled again before Ravan's indomitable prince. The next morning at dawn, within his palace, Indra, lord of the clouds, rose from his throne that was carved from a single ruby. He said, "Let my chariot be fetched. I will go to war myself." Matali brought the fabled Rath to the palace steps. As Indra prepared to ride, formidable thunderclouds scudded into the sky above him and were gashed with jagged streaks of lightning and deafening peals of thunder. Gandharvas sang and played on marvelous instruments, and Apsaras danced in his court when the king of Devloka went to war. Indra came majestically to battle, and around him were the 11 Rudras, the 8 Vasus, the 12 Adityas, the 49 Maruts, the Ashwins, and the Lokpals, who are the guardians of creation. A shrill wind began to moan across Devlok, cold and fierce. The sun was shorn of his splendor, and hundreds of meteors fell out of the sky in evil omen. Ravan also climbed into his Viman, fashioned by Vishwakarma. Now immense serpents were coiled around the disk of the sky to strike fear in the enemy's heart. The Viman itself appeared to be in flames for the fiery breath of those nags. Ravan came to battle surrounded by dense swarms of winged Rakshasas and some Asurs too. Ravan advanced to the head of his army and faced Indra of the Devas. Meghnad gave way to his father and fought behind him now. Battle was joined with Kumbhakaran. The Leviathan erupted on the legions of Devaloka. He hardly cared whom he fought, but slaughtered anyone who came in his way, drank their blood, and wore their entrails round his neck like horrible garlands, and his heaven shaking roars silenced every other sound on the field. But with Indra leading them, the Devas were infused with a new resolve. Despite Kumbhakaran's dreadful advent, the first hour of the encounter swung surely the Devas' way. The guards cut down the demons' front lines with fusillades of astras, still clutching their common and strange mounts. Rakshas and Asurs lay limb severed and twitching their last on the ground. A river of gore swelled between the two armies, and vultures and crows drank from its scarlet flow. In a brief hour, 100,000 Rakshasas perished. Then Ravan, with his 10 heads in plain sight, all of them breathing fire, leaped down from his chariot and plunged at the Dev host. Hewing his way through those lines of shining warriors, the demon rushed at Indra in a blast of crimson. Indra raised his bow and, shaking the 10 directions with his potent twanging, shot a clutch of arrows with the power of Agni and Surya at Ravan's roaring cone of heads. Ravan raised his own bow and replied with shafts of darkness and fear that were no less potent than the Lord of Devloks were. Another unnatural night fell over the battle. Still Rakshas and Deva fought on, as if they could not stop themselves. They fought blindly, scarcely knowing if they slew friend or foe. It was a sorcerous night, and that had fallen, and just three of the warriors who fought as its heart saw through its darkness. Indra, who consumed the legions of evil as he pleased with his astras, saw Ravan was not blinded by the Mayik dark, and neither was his son Meghnad. Ravan saw millions of his Rakshasas burned alive by Indra's prodigious missiles. He saw his army dwindle before his eyes. He screeched at his Sarthi, "Ride at the Lokpals, I will cut Indra's head from his neck today, and Varun's, Yams, and Kuber's, and I will rule from Amravati." The host of heaven, it is told, Rama, stretched from the Nandan, which is just below Amravati, to the eastern mountain Uday. The Lokpals fought upon that mountain. Ravan's Sarthi flitted like a fiendish thought through the legions of Rakshasas, Gandharvas, Charans, and the rest. Indra saw the Rakshas coming and cried to his Dev, "Ravan cannot be killed. Let us take him captive and hold him instead." From the north, the demon plowed his way deep into the Dev army as he would violate a woman. From the south, Indra thrust his way into the Rakshas army. After 100 bloody yojans, the two came face to face. Seeing his forces decimated by the Rakshas, Indra attacked him with such ferocity, Ravan was forced to retreat. A great cry went up from the other Rakshasas and the Asurs. "We are undone." Meghnad watched all this, quivering with ire. He jumped into his chariot and, using his Tamsi Maya, flew into the fray invisibly, sowing death at all around him. The Dev army scattered like straws in a gale. Meghnad flew at Indra himself, and the lord of the Devas could not see his adversary for the Maya he was cloaked in, which was Shiva's boon to the Rakshasa prince. Indra saw just the storm of arrows Meghnad loosed at him. The storm that smashed his chariot in shards and wounded Matali. Indra fled the field. He returned to battle, now mounted on his white elephant, Eravat, who trod air. Still, Meghnad's Maya was beyond him. He could neither penetrate its opacity nor catch a glimpse of his assailant. Indra felt dizzy from the deluge of arrows that fell on him from the sky, the torrent of arrows that besieged him from every side, the geysers of arrows that rose from below him when he took to the air. Indra felt himself being bound by inexorable hoops of power. He felt himself being made fast by Meghnad, master of Maya and the king of the Devas, the lord of the immortals of Devloka, master of the elements, was helpless to resist the Rakshas prince's sorcery. In a daze, in disbelief, Indra allowed himself to be snatched from his elephant's back by immaterial fingers to a remote corner of the war. Meanwhile, Ravan fought like an Akshoni of demons by himself and faced the Adityas and the Vasus. But those Devas contained the Rakshas effortlessly. They drove him back with shining valor. For the first time ever, Meghnad saw his proud father shamed on the field. He saw him uncertain and fumbling at his bow. That prince called across the field to Ravan, "Father, come away. The war is won. Indra is my captive. Rule the three worlds as you please, my lord. You are their only sovereign now." When the Adityas and the Vasus heard Meghnad, they laid down their weapons and fought no more. Ravan rode up to his magnificent son and clasped him in his arms. He cried, "You are the savior of our race." He cast a triumphant glance at Indra, held fast in the shimmering coils of Meghnad's astra. Ravan said, "Meghnad, my heroic child, take your captive home to Lanka. I will follow you with Prahast, Marich, and the others." The victorious Meghnad came home to a delirious reception from his people. Women and children lined the streets when they heard who it was that their prince had brought as his prisoner. Not a Rakshas or a Rakshasi stayed home. The old and infirm had themselves carried out to celebrate this impossible victory of their king and his son, their own incredible victory, the triumph of the race of the Rakshasas, the firstborn race of creation. Brahma intervenes. The Devas came in disarray to Brahma and told him how Meghnad had taken Indra captive. Brahma went with the Devas to Lanka. Like a four-faced sun, he appeared in the sky over the city of the Rakshasas, and in a voice of ages said to Ravan, "Your son has truly made you lord of the three worlds. He is your equal, Rakshas. Perhaps he is even greater than you are. For what he has done today, I name him Indrajit, and the worlds shall know him by that name from now. But Indrajit, you must not incur the sin of holding the king of Devloka a prisoner. Look, the Devas have come here with me. They are willing to pay you whatever price you ask to release Indra." Without a moment's hesitation, Indrajit replied, "Give me immortality, and I will release the Deva." Brahma said, "There is no immortality for any of the living. Why? When my time comes, I myself will die." Indrajit grew thoughtful. Slowly he said, "I will accept another boon from you, Pitama. Whenever I go out to battle, I worship Agni. Let a chariot of power emerge from the flames, and as long as I sit in the chariot, let me not die. If, however, I fail to worship Agni before I go out to fight, then I may be killed if there is a warrior who can kill me." Brahma said, "So be it." Indrajit spoke an ancient and secret mantra. The coils of the astra that held Indra vanished, and the king of the Devas was free. How miserable that splendid god was, how utterly vanquished in spirit, that a Rakshas stripling had conquered him, shamed him, marched him, the lord of the Devas, through the streets of Lanka. Even death could hardly be worse than this. And now, their mission fulfilled, the other Devas flew up into the heaven, but Indra could not ascend. He was leaden, his body had turned gross. He stood mute, with his head hung before his father, Brahma, the creator, in a jungle in the world. Finally, the Dev said in a worshipper, "Pitamaha, what happened today? How was I, Indra, king of the Devas, defeated in battle?" Brahma's eyes were full of deep memories. He said gently, "My son, you have forgotten an old sin you once committed. You have forgotten Ahalya and the Rishi Gotama's curse." Indra shuddered to remember. He had lain with the Rishi's perfect wife, who was like a tongue of fire, and the sage had cursed him. Gotham had cursed Indra to show 1,000 organs of lust upon his body, because this was the first time in creation that sin had been committed, and Indra was its perpetrator. Thereafter, men too would commit this mother of every other sin, and the worlds would decay in time through the four yugas. After Indra had performed a searing penance, Brahma had mitigated the curse. So Indra had 1,000 eyes upon his body instead of 1,000 phalluses. But Gotham had also cursed Indra that half the sin of every adultery committed in the world would accrue to him for being the first adulterer. The other half would be borne by those that committed the sin, and this would weaken his power until one day he would fall into an enemy's hands in battle. Gotham had also said the throne of Devloka would never be secure from then. Indra would often be driven from heaven, and some asura or other would rule in his place. Ahalya had been the first perfect and perfectly beautiful woman, but when she sinned, all the world shared her beauty, and there were other women as lovely as she. And of course, you know, Ram, that Gautam cursed her to be a heap of dust in their ashram until your blue feet touched her, and she was forgiven her sin and reunited with her husband. Brahma said again, Indra, do you remember the sin you committed that turned all the ages dark? This is your punishment. Indra whispered, Pitamaha, how can I be rid of the curse? How can I rise into Devloka again? Perform a yajna in the name of Vishnu and you shall ascend from the very Yajnishala. Tears filled the Dev's eyes and he said, Pitamaha, my son Jayant is dead. Brahma said, No, Puloma has hidden him under the sea. Jayant will return to you when you have performed the yajna. With that, Brahma vanished. Indra performed the Vishnu Yajna. And as soon as the last mantra was chanted and the last oblations offered into the sacred fire, he felt a pulsing and ecstatic radiance enfold him. He felt the grossness he had acquired in defeat melt into that blue and loving illumination. His body purified into the form of light. Once more Indra flew up into Devlok. He ruled from the throne in Amravati again. And so it is, Ram. The wise say that Indrajit was greater than Ravan, for in battle it was not the father but the son who conquered the Dev king. But however that may be, after Indra himself was vanquished, who else in creation would dare stand against the might of Ravan of Lanka? And so, ever since Ravan was master of the three worlds, of Swarag, Bhumi, and Patal, all their denizens, all their greatest monarchs, paid the evil one homage. They sent him tribute, lest he come again to their kingdoms with his dreadful legions. Ravan worships Shiva. But now Ram asks the Muni Agastya in mild surprise, O jewel among all the twice born, were the Kshatriyas of the earth all cowards then, that they allowed Ravan to tame them and rule them so easily? Agastya smiled. Once during his endless campaigns, Ravan arrived at the gates of a splendid city of men called Mahishmati. Mahishmati in the world was said to be no less magnificent than Amravati in heaven. The king of Mahishmati was called Arjun, and his clan was the Haya. Arjun was a Bhagat of Agni Dev, and with the fire god's blessing, Mahishmati became a wonder upon the earth. In return, Arjun always kept the sacred Agni burning in a great pit and the Agni kund filled with kush grass. The day Ravan came to Mahishmati, Arjun of the high hairs had gone with his women to the Narmada to bathe and to sport. Ravan said to Arjun's ministers, I have heard your king is the mightiest Kshatriya in the world. I have come seeking battle with him. Where is he? But the ministers, who were wise men, replied that they did not know where Arjun was, nor when he would return. Ravan took himself to the Vindhya mountains of 1,000 peaks, mantled with emerald forests and infested with lions and other beasts, of whom the tawny ones are the lords. When rivers fell here in cascades from sheer summits, they seemed to utter a hoarse laugh. Devs, Gandharvas, Apsaras, and Kinnars came to the Vindhya to sport and to make love, and the mountain that stood rooted like Anant Shesh with his 1,000 hoods, the peaks and the mountain streams were his forked tongues, seemed truly like a piece of swarg fallen into Bhumi below. Ravan sought the greatest river that flowed down the Vindhyachal, the blessed Narmada, which made its shimmering way into the western sea. It was a warm day, and he saw bison, elephants, herds of deer, bears, and lions quenching their thirst at different pools along the Narmada's course. He saw the rippling currents laden with goose, duck, ibis, teal, and every sort of water bird, some that had flown across the earth to arrive here. The river was crowned with a crest of trees in full bloom. Her breasts were two flocks of Chakravaks, sandbanks were her hips, floating swans her girdle, her limbs were anointed with brilliant pollens, as if with the paste of the sandalwood tree. Full blown lotuses were the eyes of the Narmada. Ravan saw her from above and was seized by a compulsion to bathe in her. He felt it would be like being embraced by a goddess. He flew down in his petal quiet Viman with his ministers and sat on the banks of the holy and beautiful river. Sitting there on velvet moss, enchanted, he murmured in adoration, Ah, she is the Ganga. Then he returned to Shuk and Saran, who sat closest to their king. Look, the sun has dimmed himself in reverence to see me. He who sears the earth has turned mild as the moon to see Ravan. He seemed to be carried away in this vein. Can you feel how Vayu, the wind, blows gently around us for fear of me? And despite the birds, fish, and crocodiles she bears on her currents, even the river seems like a timid young girl before me. My friends, you bear upon your bodies the blood of 100 kings of the earth, each of each of whom would vie with Indra in might, even as the Diggaj do in the Akshaganga. Bathe now in this lovely Narmada. She will take your sins from you, my Rakshasas. I too shall offer worship to my Lord Shiva in her waters. Perhaps the Mahodar, Shuk, Sharan, Drumraksh, and all his other ministers entered the clear water, and she quivered with their virile presences, even as the Ganga does when the elephants that bear creation upon their backs bathe in the golden river of the north. When they had finished their ablutions, the Rakshasas fetched flowers for their king, for his worship. Soon there was another small mountain of resonant blossoms piled high on the sandbank, which shone like a white cloud lit by the noon sun. Then Ravan himself waded into the lucid flow, just as the lord of the elephants enters the Ganga, majestically, and last of all. He offered flowers on the water. He chanted the Gayatri mantra 1,000 times. He dipped his head under the cool, clear flow. When he had finished this purifying ritual, he stepped out, set aside his wet clothes, and put on a white silk robe. Ravan offered more flowers to a golden shivling he had brought with him, and now installed in an altar of sand. He anointed it with the finest sandalwood paste. Then he raised his hands to heaven and sang and danced with abandon to Shiva, who removes the suffering of virtues and bestows the greatest boons. As Ravan danced, so did his Rakshasas, like swaying mountains. For all their girth and bulk, they were surprisingly graceful, and their worship was soulful and queerly elegant. Now it happened that quite near, And downstream from where the invincible Rakshas offered his flowers on the water, great Arjun of Mahishmati, the son of Kritvirya, sported in the Narmada with his women. He stood in the swirling current like a bull elephant among his cows. Arjun was a thousand armed Kshatriya, and to show off his awesome strength to his women, he stretched all thousand arms out across the gushing river, bank to bank. Soon the water no longer flowed. Kartvirjya Arjun's arms arrested its tide like a dam. The river rose in one place and then flowed back upstream, laden with fish, tortoises, and crocodiles, and with copious armfuls of kush grass and the flowers of Ravan's worship. In that unnatural flood, the water swept back toward where Ravan was at his worship. Ravan's eyes turned red as poppies. He glared at the river as if he were gazing at one of his wives being enjoyed by another man. The birds were calm enough in the trees. The elephant seemed at peace. He could find no reason why the water flooded back to him. Ravan was forced to abandon his incomplete worship. He spoke no word, only pointed a long and imperious finger downstream. He looked at Shuk and Saran that they should investigate what or who had dared interrupt him. The river flowed west, and Shuk and Saran set their faces in that direction and rose into the air. When they had flown just a few moments and half a yojan, they saw a thousand armed Kshatriya playing in the water with his women. He was as great as a shal tree. The river swelled around him, tossed his hair on its transparent currents like moss, then flowed back from him as if in fear of that warrior. Shuk and Saran hung invisibly in the air. They saw that the Kshatriya in the river was formidable. His eyes red rimmed, his body hard as a rock, his every movement proclaiming that he was a great king, never to be trifled with. Shuk and Saran flashed away, still unseen, back to their master. They flew down before Ravan and said breathlessly, Lord, there is a man we do not know in the river had a yojan downstreams. He is as tall as a shal tree, and his arms are countless, even like the branches of a tree. He has a thousand women around him, and to amuse them, he has spread his arms like a dam across the Narmada, and she cannot flow past him, but breaks her banks as if in terror and flows back toward us. Ravan growled, It is Karatvira Arjun. At once he set off down the flooding river, hungry for a fight. The wind rose and howled around the lord of the Rakshasas, blowing up a pall of dust. In moments, dark clouds filled the sky, shook with the thunder and lightning, and poured down a drizzle of blood. Bright as antimony in the fallen gloom, Ravan arrived at the recalcitrant pool on the river, which Arjun had created with his thousand arms. In a voice like 10 peals of thunder, Ravan said to the Kshatriyas ministers, Tell your king, Hayahas, that Ravan of Lanka has come to seek battle with him. The ministers replied, You are a shrewd judge of the time to fight, O Ravan, that you have come when our king is drunk and sporting with his women. You come like a cunning tiger, which chooses to attack a bull elephant when he is in a rut among his cows. We say to you, Rakshasa, if you are a man of honor, remain here with us tonight, and tomorrow our king will fight you. But if you are impatient and must fight at once, you must face us first, because we will not let you pass to our king. And they drew their swords and stood defiantly before Ravan and his Rakshasas. That battle did not last more than a few moments before the Hehas were all slain and most of them eaten by the demons from Lanka, who by now were hungry. More ministers and soldiers from Kritvirya Arjun's camp came rushing to face Ravan. They poured in like an angry sea from every side, losing tides of fierce missiles at the marauders. The Heres drew first blood, but then roaring to shake the mountain, Perhaps Marich, Shuk, Sharan, and other great Rakshasas began to cut them down. So the flooding Narmada was tinted with their dark gore. The Rakshasas still ate their adversaries as they fought on. Some of the Arjun's soldiers fled the battle in the forest and went flying to their king. At languorous love in the river, they babbled out their story, and he came out slowly from the water. He said to his women in perfect calm, "Do not be afraid." Krutviri Arjun's eyes were slits of copper. His anger flared up like the fire at the end of the yugas, which consumes the world. He picked up a mace and set out to hunt the Rakshasas. Arjun of the higher hairs scattered the Rakshas front line as the sun does the night's darkness at dawn. He came among them like a twisting tempest, the mace in his hands, striking out in every direction, felling 1,000 demons each moment. Then Parhasta loomed in his path like another Vindhya, with what seemed to be a great pestle in his hand. Roaring like death, Parhast cast the occult weapon at Arjun. As it flew at him, its tip burned with the mysterious red fire, formed like an Ashok flower. But Arjun flung his own mace at that weapon. He flung it with 500 arms. The two ayuds exploded against each other. Kritviri Arjun still held a mace in his hands, and he rushed at the astonished Parhast and struck him a blow like a doom on his head, like a bull struck by Indra's Vajra. Ravan's Senapati crumbled. Seeing Parhast overcome so quickly, so easily, Marich, Shuk, Sharad, Mahodra, and the rest slunk away from the field like dogs. Only Ravan remained to confront Arjun like two stormy seas, two agitated mountains, two suns, two apocalyptic fires, two bulls fighting for a cow in heat, two thunderclouds, two lions like Rudra and Kal. Kritviri, Arjun, and Ravan rushed at each other, maces in hand. Their blows were like erupting volcanoes, like earthquakes, like the world being cloven. When Arjun swung his gada at his enemy's chest, it was a gash of lightning that briefly turns a dark, ominous sky golden. And when Ravan swung his mace at the stupendous Kshatriya, it resembled a meteor falling through the sky onto a mountain. Neither combatant seemed to tire, though they fought like two rivers in spate, trying to drown each other. Why they fought even as Indra and the Asur Bali did of old. Suddenly, the high hairs cast his mace at his opponent like a bolt of fate. That blow would have killed any other warrior in the three worlds, but the mace smashed to dust against Ravan's chest, protected by Brahma's boom. But Ravan staggered back a bow's length and sank to the ground, crying out in pain. Seeing his chance, Arjun darted forward and seized the Rakshas in his 1,000 arms, as Garud would a serpent. Krit Arjun bound Ravan, even as Vishnu once did Bali. From above there fell a delicate shower of fine petals from the Indra's garden, from the immaterial hands of the Siddhs, Charans, and Devas. When he had Ravan firmly, as a tiger, a deer, or a lion, an elephant, mighty Kritviri Arjun flung back his head and roared again and again, echoing thunder. Meanwhile, Parhast, whom Arjun had felled earlier, had come to his senses. Seeing his precious lord held fast in 1,000 arms, he sprang up and charged Arjun. Following their Senapati celebrating his recovery, Marich, Shuk, Mahodra, Saran, and all the other Rakshasas rushed at Arjun from many sides. Perhaps the main assailant loosed every sort of weapon at the Kshatriya who held his master helpless. But with his 1,000 hands, Arjun plucked them from the air as they flew at him. Then he also held countless bows in numberless hands and shot such an extravagance of missiles at the Rakshasas that he scattered them as the wind does the fleecy clouds of summer. Victorious, the great high highs brought Ravan immobile in the thongs of 1,000 arms back to his city. Mahishmati, like a jewel upon the earth, Along his triumphal march through his streets, women and Brahmins showered seasons of flowers over their conquering king and harvests of rice grains, said the matchless Muni Auguste in the court of Ayodhya in the perfect Ram's Sabha. Any question? No? Okay. So I'm going to just read then Ravan and Vali also. So these are all the different battles Ravan had. But over here, he got caught. Okay. So, but let's see what happens. How he gets out of that Arjun. He's another name for this Arjun is Sahasra Bahu Arjun. Okay. So, so it's not the same Arjun as in Dwapara. Okay. So Ravan and Vali, and we know Vali is a brother of Sugriv, if you remember that from the previous story. In lofty Brahmaloka, Pulastya Muni, Ravan's grandfather, heard the Devas tell with relish how Kritvirya Arjun had taken Ravana prisoner, which they said was hardly easier than capturing the wind. Pulastya arrived in Mahashmati by Rishi Path, the ethereal skyway of the sages of heaven. When Arjun's ministers saw the Muni, who was as splendid as a sun and hard even to look at, they ran into their king to tell him that Pulastya himself had come to their city. Kritviri Arjun folded his palms above his head and came out to receive the Holy One. The high king came with the Argha, with his own Brahmins going ahead of him, as Brihaspati does when Indra comes to the gates of Amravati to greet Brahma. Arjun offered Pulastya Muni Madhupark, a cow, and water to wash his feet with, then said to him in some rapture, O prince among rishis, today my Mahishmati is as blessed as Amravati. My life is fruitful today that Pulastya Muni has come to grace my city. My kingdom and my people are yours to command. All that I own is yours. And he prostrated himself before the rishi. Pulastya laid a hand on the king's head and raised him up. He asked after the welfare of his kingdom, his family, his children, and his people. Then Pulastya said, You have no equal in strength and valor anywhere. O Kritvarya Arjuna, that Ravan himself is your prisoner. Only you have ever vanquished my grandson, in awe of whom the sea and the wind stand still. You have consumed his glory, and I, Pulaste, have come to beg you to set my child free. Arjun did not say a word. He clapped his hands to have Ravan fetched from the dungeon where he held him and set him free without condition. Why that Kshatriya gave Ravan lavish gifts of unearthly ornaments and clothes and swore a covenant with him before a sacred fire that neither of them would attack the other. With this, Arjun bowed low to Pulastya, took the pad dhuli from his feet, and went back into his palace. The rishi too blessed his chastened grandson and vanished in a flare of light back to Brahmlok. Ravan returned to Lanka. Now that he had sworn friendship with Kritvari Arjuna, there was truly no king left in the three worlds who could pose a threat to the Rakshas. He ruled as he pleased and extended his sinister sway as far as he ranged. He never hesitated to drink the blood of anyone who dared oppose him. And if he ever heard that any king or warrior anywhere of any race was powerful, he made it a point to visit him and either kill him or have his abject surrender. Once Ravan heard that there was a peerless hero in a jungle of Bharatvarsh. He was a warner of untold valor and strength, a king of his people, and his name was Vali. Vali ruled the secret city of Kishikanda. And when Ravan heard about his prowess, and his exploits, he went to Kishikanda and rolled out a challenge to Vali. At this, Vali's wife and chief minister Tara, her father Sushen, who was Vali's physician, and his brother Sugriv came and said variously to Ravana, Lord of Lanka, Vali is not in Kishkanda, and no one else in the city is even remotely a match for you. Our king has gone to the shores of the four seas to say his Sandhya Vandan. We beg you, wait, and he will return shortly. Ravan gazed in some curiosity at a great pile of glistening bones heaped outside the hidden gates of Kishikanda. He saw some bones were intact, but others had been crushed almost to powder. Tara said to him, these are the bones of those who sought to test their strength against Vali. Not even if you have drunk Amrit, Rakshas, will you escape death if you fight him. Ravan, if you are in a hurry to die, go to the shore of the southern ocean and you will find my husband there at his Sandhya Vandan, glowing like Agni Dev. Come down to the earth. He growled at her. We shall see how a monkey fights Ravan of Lanka. Climbing back into the Pushpak Viman, he flew quickly as a thought to the southern shore. There he saw an immense figure seated on the sands, like a small golden mountain, entirely absorbed in his twilight worship. His face, which shone like a rising sun, was turned toward the scarlet sea into which the sun sank like treasure. Ravan, black as night, crept up behind the Vanar to seize him, but Vali sensed him coming. He saw him out of the corner of his eye. Vali showed no anger. Rather, he smiled serenely when he glimpsed the 10 headed demon creeping up on him like a thief. He was like a lion that spied a rabbit, or Garud sensing a snake. He did not pause his chanting of the Vedic mantras, but he prepared himself for Ravan. He was also determined that he would complete his worship at all the four seas this very evening. Unaware that he was discovered, Ravan crept up close behind the Vanar. But when he raised his arm to seize Vali, quicker than light, the great monkey spun around and gripped Ravan's neck in his armpit. The Rakshas roared. He struggled. He flayed out at Vali, but he could not get free. The Vanar held him fast. He held him as easily as he would a child. The other Rakshasas now leaped out of the Viman and rushed at the Vanar to rescue their king. But holding Ravan dangling from his armpit, Vali rose steeply into the sky, lit by the last shafts of the setting sun. The pursuing Rakshasas flew up after him, but they could not match Vali's thought like speed. The mountains of the earth swayed out of Vali the Vanar's way as he sped towards the three remaining oceans, worshipping the goddesses of dawn and dusk, being honored by the birds of the air. He alighted on the shore of the western sea with Ravan dangling helplessly from his armpit like a rag doll. Vali immersed himself in the western ocean and chanted the Sandhya mantra. Standing waist deep in the water, he flew up again, flitted away to the northern sea, and worshipped there as well, immersing Ravan as if the Rakshas were a strange limb of himself. He worshipped at the eastern sea also, then flew home to Kishikanta and down into the Sylvan garden just outside his city. Now Vali felt a trifle tired, having carried Ravan across the length and breadth of Bharatvarsha. He lifted his arm, scratched himself as monkeys do, and let the Rakshas fall from his armpit. And pretending to notice him only now, began laughing uproariously. From where did you spring? He asked. Ravan said humbly by now. Vanarendra, I am Ravan, and I came seeking a duel with you. For I heard of your prowess, but I never dreamed there existed in this world anyone who could do to me what you have done today. And ah, how swiftly you flew! I thought only the mind, Vayudev, and Garuda flew so fast. O jewel among monkeys, having seen you and felt your strength, I would not have you as my enemy. I beg you, let us be friends forever. Let us swear friendship before a sacred Agni. Let all our lands, our women, our soldiers, our food, all we own, belong to the both of us jointly. Let us be allies like brothers. And laughing, Wali agreed. They lit a fire, embraced, and the lord of the monkey, folk of the earth, and the emperor of the Rakshasas swore to be friends unto death. Then Vali led Ravan into Kishkanda, like one lion leading another into his cave. For a month, Ravana lived in Kishkanda and was treated even as Sugriv was in that wonderful hidden city. Agastya glanced at Ravan in some wonder and said, "It was that invincible Vali whom you killed with just one arrow, Ram." Ram sighed, and Sugriv had tears in his golden eyes. So let's stop it here. Next chapter is about Hanumanji. And but still, this is Agastya Muni. He's telling all this, the details.